Welcome to The Explainer. There's one thing every single one of us has in common: suffering. It's just a fundamental part of being human. So today, we're going to dig into that. We'll look at some of the oldest philosophical maps and the newest psychological tools that have been created to help us navigate this tricky terrain. Okay, so here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll get on the same page about what suffering actually is. Then we'll explore two totally different ways of thinking about it. Two paths, if you will. From there, we'll see how modern psychology kind of merges these ideas. And we'll wrap up with some really practical stuff on what liberation actually looks like in practice. All right, first things first, what even is suffering? And why does it seem to be at the very core of the human story? This quote from the poet Ahmad Shamlou, wow, it just hits you, right? He's saying something pretty radical here. That suffering isn't some bug in the system, some interruption to our otherwise happy lives. No. He says it's the very proof that we're alive. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. Our pain is what proves we're here. It's like the very friction that makes the lamp of our body burn bright. Okay, so from a more clinical, psychological point of view, suffering is this really broad experience, right? It's that feeling of dissatisfaction, of unpleasantness, when we're faced with something harmful or threatening. It's the polar opposite of pleasure. And it's so important to remember, we're not just talking about stubbing your toe here. This covers the whole spectrum of mental and emotional pain we all go through. So this brings us to the big question, the one that philosophers and thinkers have been chewing on for literally centuries. If suffering is just part of the deal of being human, what are we supposed to do about it? Well, that question leads us to our first major strategy, our first potential answer. We can call it the path of reduction. The core idea is super simple. The best way to handle suffering is to, well, have less of it, to escape it, or at least minimize it as much as you possibly can. Now, this way of thinking is huge in certain philosophies, like with Schopenhauer, and it's central to traditions like Buddhism. The idea is that the real engine of our pain is our own desires. The logic is pretty clear, right? If wanting things is what causes us to suffer, then the most logical solution is to just want less. And this slide, I love this, because it shows this epic clash of ideas. On one side, you've got Schopenhauer, who basically says, life is a burning building, so find yourself a little fireproof room and hide out. Reduce your desires, protect yourself. But then comes Nietzsche, who was a student for a while, and he just scoffs at that. He says that's a life of denial. It's passive. Nietzsche's advice? Forget the fireproof room. Go build your house on the side of an active volcano. Embrace the danger, because that struggle is the only way you'll ever become something great. And this isn't just some old philosophical debate. You can see this idea of reduction in modern thinkers too, like Mustafa Malakian. He essentially argues that the whole point of modern spirituality isn't some far-off abstract goal. It's really practical. It's about reducing suffering right here, right now, so we can cultivate tranquility, happiness, and hope in this life. Okay, so that's one path. Run from the fire. But what if suffering isn't something to escape from at all? This brings us to our second path, the strategy of transformation. And this requires a total 180 in how you look at things. In this view, suffering isn't the enemy. It's actually a catalyst. It's the very thing that can spark growth and lead to a more meaningful life. So it's not an obstacle you have to get around. It's a tool you can use. The most powerful example of this comes from Viktor Frankl. I mean, this is a man who survived the absolute horror of Auschwitz. And it was in the concentration camps that he developed his entire therapeutic approach, which he called logotherapy. He saw something incredible. The people who survived weren't always the strongest or healthiest. They were the ones who could find some kind of meaning in all that unimaginable suffering. For them, the main drive in life wasn't to chase pleasure or avoid pain. It was to find a reason, a purpose, that made enduring it all worthwhile. So for Frankl, it all boils down to this really powerful idea. He said that between the stimulus, the thing that happens to us, and our response, there's a little gap, a space. And inside that space is our greatest power, the power to choose our attitude. The suffering might be a given, you can't control that, but how you respond, your search for meaning within it, that is where all your freedom and all your growth live. And this idea of transforming suffering isn't new, of course. It has really deep roots. You see it in Persian mysticism and Islamic theology, for instance, where suffering is often seen as a kind of divine test, an ibtila. It's not a punishment. It's a process of purification. Think of it like fire refining gold.
The intense heat burns away the impurities and leaves something stronger and more pure. It's a path to a deeper connection with the divine.
Okay, so now we have these two big, powerful, and kind of competing ideas on the table. Do you reduce suffering or do you try to transform it? So the big question is, where does modern psychology land on this? How does it bridge that gap? Well, that's where something called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT for short, comes into the picture. And it offers a really cool synthesis. Here's the big shift. ACT doesn't try to get rid of your pain. That's not the goal. Instead, it's all about changing your relationship to your pain. It teaches you how to carry it with you while still moving toward a life that you actually value. It basically says, look, pain is a part of life, you can't escape it. But a meaningful life is also possible, right alongside it. So how does it do that? Well, ACT gives us this really practical 6-part toolkit. It's like a process. You start with acceptance, just opening up to those difficult thoughts and feelings instead of constantly fighting them. Then comes something called cognitive diffusion, which is a game changer. It's about learning to see your thoughts, not as literal truths. So that voice that says, I'm not good enough, you learn to see it as just a bunch of words your brain produced, not a fact about you. From there, it's about being present, connecting with that observer part of you that isn't your thoughts, figuring out what your core values really are, and then, this is key, taking committed action based on those values. The whole point is to stop the tug-of-war inside your own head and start putting your energy into building a life you care about. And you can see the direct payoff of each of these steps, right? That cognitive diffusion stuff, that's what dials down the volume on your inner critic. Acceptance, that's what ends that exhausting, pointless struggle against reality, which is huge for reducing anxiety. And clarifying your values, well, that's like being handed a compass in the middle of a forest. It gives you a direction, a way to navigate toward a life that actually feels satisfying. All right, so we've been on quite a journey here, through some pretty deep philosophy and psychology. What's the big takeaway? Let's bring it all home. We looked at path number 1, escape suffering, and path number 2, transform suffering. What modern psychology and tools like ACT give us is kind of a third way, a synthesis. It shows us that true liberation, it's not about finally reaching some magical pain-free destination. It's about building the skill, the psychological flexibility, to accept the pain that's there and still commit to moving towards what's important to you. It's not a place you arrive at, it's a practice, something you do day in and day out. So ultimately, the question isn't how do I get rid of suffering? Because you can't. The real question is, how will I choose to relate to it? Is your goal to escape it, or is it to find a way to transcend it? And honestly, the answer you choose, that's what's going to write the story of your life.